So number 9, Finance, Operations, and Technology Department. 9A is an action item, consider approval of recommendation adopting the 2025-2026 fiscal year annual operating budget for the General Fund, Child Nutrition Fund, and Debt Service Fund. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, President Councilman. Good evening, trustees. Again, real quick, the board policy reference for this agenda item is CE Legal and CE Local. So obviously a lot's happened since our last budget presentation to the board with the legislative session wrapping up. So we do want to provide you guys some brief updates on what's happened since then, and also give you kind of the final update with regards to our budget, and then also talk about kind of the last steps with our budgeting process, specifically our tax rate. So we'll go through that real quick this evening. Again, just kind of continuing to march through our budget process. We're coming down to the end now with just a couple of major milestones left. Obviously, the legislative session ended on June 2nd. June 16th is today, where you guys have the current agenda item for your consideration, which is the second to the last step in the budget process, which is adopting the 25-26 fiscal year budget. After that, obviously our fiscal year starts on July 1. Last major milestones are receiving our final certified tax values from the various appraisal districts on or before July 31st. Once we receive that information, that we really can kind of make our final tax rate projections and calculations and submit that information to TEA. Right now, we plan on coming back to you guys on August the 4th for a special work session to go over all of those final tax rate calculations and the impact that could have on the next fiscal year. And then planning to come back on our August 18th regular board meeting for the final step in the process of our budget and tax rate process and adopt a resolution adopting the 25-26 tax rate. So again, coming down here to the end and just a couple more steps left over the next couple of months. Having said that, kind of transitioning to the legislative update very briefly. As you guys know, they started this legislative session with roughly about a $24 billion surplus. Now that the legislative session is over and most of the bills have been we think are going to be approved by the governor that have been sent to the governor's desk, the Texas Comptroller can make all of his final calculations on what the next biennium is going to look like based on all the legislation that was passed. One of the more interesting things that came out last week is he is now projecting the state's rainy day fund or the economic stabilization fund to end the next biennium with roughly about a $28.5 billion balance, which will, for the first time in its history, will actually exceed the legislative mandated cap of that fund. And so they will have to take steps in the next biennium to bring that below that cap. And then if things continue on the trend that he's projecting by 2035, that balance could have in excess of almost $40 billion in it. So just, again, I thought that was interesting post-legislative session. Just kind of as a reminder, as you guys are aware, back in December in preparation of the legislative session, you adopted 5 legislative priorities for Rockwall ISD. I won't go into all of them. You guys are very aware of this. But basically making sure that we're fully funding the basic allotment, fully funding safety and security requirements and mandates, fully funding special education. We talked about creating an index factor for the basic allotment so that as inflation adjusts in the market over the years, that hopefully our basic allotment is adjusting along with that, and then also assessment reform. Obviously, the number one most important priority for Rockwall ISD was adjusting the basic allotment because that kind of is the foundation for all of our funding. Not only would it provide a pay increase for all teachers and staff, but it also provides the most local control for school districts so they can address their individualized specific needs. And again, just to kind of back up, this will be important here in just a second. We calculated that if the basic allotment were to be adjusted just to account for inflation since 2019, which was the last time it was adjusted, it would need to be adjusted from $6,160, which is where it currently is at, up to $7,655, which is roughly about a $1,500 increase. And so we'll see what that increase actually was. House Bill 2, as I'm sure most of you are very familiar with at this point, was the major school finance bill that was eventually passed and signed into law by the governor. It is an $8.5 billion public school funding package, and so we want to kind of give you guys some of the details right now. I will say all the information that we're going to present to you guys tonight is still in very early form. Obviously, with a funding package and legislation of this magnitude, this complex and this comprehensive, there's a lot of interpretation that has to be done. There's a lot of guidance that has to be provided. And up until last Thursday, there actually hadn't been any guidance provided to school districts. So we've just now started getting some of the guidance from TEA. And so everything that we're going to present to you guys tonight is still kind of TBD. but it is what we kind of our best estimates as of today. So let's talk about kind of 30,000-foot view. So again, how much? It was roughly about an $8.5 billion school funding bill. Now, a couple of points to point out is the final version of House Bill 2 that was approved by the chambers and sent to the governor's desk is significantly different than what the House originally passed. Okay, so really House Bill 2 is only a House bill in name. Obviously, it originated in the House. They passed a particular version of that. It went to the Senate, and essentially what the Senate did is they supplanted all of their school funding plans into the vehicle, which is known as House Bill 2. And then it went back to the House, and essentially the majority of the House members concurred with those changes, and so then that's when ultimately the final version of House Bill 2 that went to the governor's desk. But just to be very clear, the original House bill version was provided much more local control to school districts. The basic allotment increase, as we'll see in just a minute, was significantly higher, and again, it provided much more local control. Now, no doubt, $8.5 billion is a lot of money. I don't think anybody would argue that. But what we're going to present to you guys tonight is not necessarily how much the bill was, but how it was structured. Okay, and so the issues that are in House Bill 2 is with the structure and the language that is in it, more so than the amount of the money that was allocated in the bill. And I think that'll kind of bear itself out here in just the next couple of slides. Okay, so kind of, again, 30,000-foot view. This is a very comprehensive bill. It does a lot of different stuff. These are kind of the main things and the things that are getting the most press out there across the state. So it did allocate roughly about $4.2 billion for teacher and support staff raises. And just to be quite frank, it prioritized smaller school districts over larger districts. Okay? And so kind of the line of demarcation that they used was if you were a school district that has less than 5,000 students, then your teachers got a larger pay increase. If you were a school district that had 5,001 students or greater, your teachers received a smaller increase. And then they further broke it down by years of experience. So you can see, for instance, for a larger, quote-unquote, school district, so this would be Rockwall ISD's case, from 0 to 2 years of experience, those teachers received nothing in House Bill 2. If you had 3 to 4 years of experience, you received $2,500. And if you had 5+ years of experience, you received $5,000. Now, again, we can go even further into the weeds about what is defined as a teacher. Is it a classroom teacher? How often do you have to? How much of your time it has to be in the classroom? And so TEA is starting to roll out some of that guidance, and so we'll continue to vet that and review that over the next coming months, so that we can recommend to you guys a final compensation package for 25-26 that complies with House Bill 2. But just kind of generally speaking, these are some of the guardrails that they have put in place so far. The next big thing that House Bill 2 did was it increased the basic allotment by $55. The way they paid for this is by redirecting $800 million from the golden penny yield to pay for this quote-unquote increase. And you'll see why that's in quotations here on the next slide. They also created a new, what they call an ABC allotment, which stands for Assistance with Basic Cost Allotment of $106 per student. What has been communicated is this was created to provide assistance to school districts with operating costs, such as utilities, insurance, transportation, etc. They also increased the school safety allotment by roughly about $430 million. So this roughly doubles the current school safety allotment that we have, which on the surface sounds like a good thing. Again, we'll give you guys more details here in just a minute on that as well. And then lastly, they also are going to change the way they fund special education in the state of Texas. And right now, they have earmarked roughly about $250 million to fund this new model. Now, this only takes effect in the second year of the biennium because this new model does not exist right now. They have basically delegated the authority to the TA commissioner to come up with this new model and essentially given him a year to do that, and it will take effect in the second year of the biennium. And so the $250 million that they have earmarked for additional SPED funding will take effect in the second year of the biennium. Yes, ma'am.
And perhaps I'm just missing something here, but on the ABC allotment, if we get 106 per student, why did they not just put that in with the 55?
That's a good question. I don't know that I can answer that.
Okay.
A lot of the language that was eventually put into House Bill 2, which again, most of that was Senate bills that had been previously passed that were supplanted into House Bill 2. A lot of that was done in negotiations between the major players. And so as far as how did they come up with $106, I don't know where that number came from. I don't know the thought process for why they did $55 in the basic allotment and created a new allotment. I don't know the answer to that, Dr. Tiger.
Is it possible because is the 106 only allowed to be used for utilities, insurance, transportation, or is it?
I think generally speaking, what they would probably say is because they heard a lot from school districts that inflation has been tough over the last 6 years, the operating costs like insurance, utilities are going up, and so I think that this is the legislature trying to acknowledge that operating costs outside of the control of the district are going up, and so they've tried to allocate some money for that. But as you'll see here in a minute, there's a little bit more to the story once you kind of dive into the details.
So it's probably not for instruction then, even though it says et cetera. It's
well,
again,
I think I don't know that there are, for lack of better term, strings attached to this money. I don't know that we have to show that we only use it on these 3 or 4 categories.
Mm-hmm.
I think they are trying to give local school districts autonomy on where they spend this money, but ultimately what they would say is we're trying to allocate dollars to recognize that operating costs are going up for school districts. So kind of broad strokes, those are some of the major things that House Bill 2. And again, there's a litany of other things that they're doing as well. But again, we're trying to work through the details of that. All right, so let's take each one of those and go into a little bit more detail. So basic allotment increase, question mark. So as we just communicated, the final version of House Bill 2, which was ultimately the Senate version, did increase on paper the basic allotment by $55. As you'll recall, the original version of House Bill 2 increased the basic allotment by $395. So again, as I mentioned earlier, it provided much more local control and obviously was a lot larger increase to the basic allotment, albeit it did not increase the basic allotment to address inflation, the $1,500 that we roughly needed, but it certainly was a good step in the right direction. So $55 funds roughly about 3.8% of the basic allotment need. And more importantly, and this is key, even though it increased the basic allotment by $5,500, this is not actually an increase in funding for school districts. I'm going to let that sink in just for a second. Now, you may say, why? All right. So here's all the different allotments that we get. You guys have heard me talk about this before. We get the basic allotment. We get allotments for special education and career tech and school safety. We also get funding for what we call our Tier 2 enrichment pennies. You guys have heard me call these copper pennies and golden pennies, right, if you have copper pennies. So the way they paid for this basic allotment increase is they took the golden penny yield, or in other words, how much each golden penny is worth, and they lowered that amount. And they took the savings from that lowering of that golden penny yield, and they moved it over to the basic allotment. In other words, they took money we were already receiving and moved it from this bucket over to this bucket. So in other words, it's not really an increase because it was money we were already receiving. And worse, even that, and this may be an unintended consequence, but it's certainly a consequence. Part of the reason they get the nickname golden pennies, and you guys have heard me talk about this before, is not only are they worth more than copper pennies, but maybe more importantly, golden pennies, no matter how property wealthy you are as a school district, are never subject to recapture. So no matter how property wealthy you are, if you have golden pennies, you will never pay recapture on those funds. Well, if I took the golden penny yield, those dollars, and moved it down to the basic allotment, what have I done? I've made more local tax collections subject to recapture. Now, if you're not a recapture district, it doesn't really impact you. But if you are a recapture district, or if you're a district that's approaching recapture or may become a recapture district at some point in the future, more of your local tax dollars may be subject to recapture because we've taken it out of the golden penny and moved it to the basic allotment. So not only is it not an increase, but we're also creating a mechanism that can increase recapture across the state. I know that was a lot, so I'll pause and see if you guys have any questions.
Okay, so is it true to say then that this year, if we were to put a Vader on the ballot and it passed, we would be getting less than what we would have if it had passed the last time?
No, ma'am. So let's do a hypothetical just real quick. Let's say we had a Vader this November and it passed. And let's say it produced, I'm just making up a number just to illustrate the point. Let's say it produced $10 million. The Vader last year would have also produced us the $10 million. Okay? Because the golden penny changes every single year, and it's based on property value growth. And so what they're doing now is they're saying, I'm going to freeze the golden penny forever, and then what it would have increased and the money you would have gotten, we're going to move it over here to the basic allotment. So, yes, a Vader in November of 2025 is worth the same amount as a Vader would have been in 2024. Okay? However, if they hadn't have done this, and we were basing it on previous law, a Vader in 2025 would have been worth more than in 2024. That makes sense. So in other words,
But
go ahead.
so if they hadn't done this,
It
a
would have
Vader
been.
in 2026 would have been more than valued than
I'll say it this
2025?
way: if they had not changed this structure, a Vader would have been worth more this year. It won't be worth less. So we wouldn't be losing any money if the Vader would have passed last year versus this year. But if a Vader would have passed this year, it would have been worth more because the golden pennies would have been worth more. Now they're basically frozen at 2024 levels.
Okay.
So customarily, the yield increases. They
Correct.
didn't increase it. They just pushed that money to the $55. So we don't go backwards, but we don't get what
Which
we normally get every year.
Correct.
put basically some of our golden penny money, like you're saying, in the other part of the cup, therefore could be recaptured at some
Correct.
time.
Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
But I think the larger point is that it's being advertised as an increase of the basic allotment, and it's actually not an increase.
So, so the state actually won't be paying any more money? It's just more money will come from local school districts?
When you
taxes?
take into account this move, yes, the state won't be paying more money. Now, what they have done and what is additional dollars is the points that we're going to get to here in a minute about the ABC allotment and increase in school safety allotments. I don't want
You're
to paint
talking
the
about the
picture.
basic allotment, the $55.
Say again. I'm sorry, sir.
You're just talking about the basic allotment increase
Yes,
of
sir.
$55?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So again, larger point is the basic allotment increase isn't really an increase, so we'll be going into year 7 and year 8 without an increase, kind of that basic allotment. Next biggest thing, and we kind of already touched on this a little bit, is the teacher pay increases. Again, they prioritize smaller districts over larger districts, including Rockwall ISD. So when you look at the most recent breakdown, 16% of our teachers under House Bill 2 would receive $0, 10% would receive $2,500, and 75, roughly about 3/4 of our teachers would just receive $5,000. Again, no doubt that our teachers have worked hard and earned very well-deserved pay increase. Again, the problem is not with the money, it's with the structure of how they did this. And not only did they prioritize small districts, but the way they're going to pay for this teacher pay increase is by creating what they call a teacher retention allotment, TRA. The thing with allotments is allotments can come and go. They have to be funded every biennium. Allotments can be prorated if there's not enough money in the state budget to fund that allotment. So right now they're saying there's a long-term commitment to funding this teacher retirement allotment in perpetuity, because obviously this is going to be used for salary increases, and so you would hope that they would fund it in perpetuity. But that is some of our concern about funding this through an allotment outside of the basic allotment. And then another thing that was included in this, and I already mentioned this, is they did exclude certain staff members from this increase. So typically, teachers, nurses, and librarians are on the same hiring schedule, so they excluded nurses and librarians. And so the most recent guidance from TA is now we're going to have multiple hiring schedules. So you guys are used to seeing the hiring schedule with all the years of experience, and typically that has covered a multitude of positions. Well, now they're recommending that we're going to have multiple hiring schedules because they're all going to be getting different amounts of money. And then obviously they excluded other staff from this as well. One important point to make is that the funds that are being provided to fund these pay increases are only for the pay increases. They are not providing funds to pay for the payroll and benefit cost increases based on those salary increases. Okay? And so we estimate right now that with the total cost of these pay increases, the district is going to have to fund roughly about $650,000 in added payroll and benefit costs to be able to fund those pay increases. And there was no funding tied to that. So again, that's what we call an unfunded mandate.
Mr. Carter, just go back to that slide real quick. So let's just say, larger districts, 3 to 4 years, $2,500 for teachers, $5,000 for 5 years plus. That's about 84% of our teachers receiving some kind of additional benefit through House Bill, the financial House Bill. So that comes out to about 1,092 staff members out of 2,300. So the rest of the staff are not included in this current bill.
They are not included in this portion of it. They did create a staff allotment that I think was like $45 per ADA, so not per enrollment, per ADA. And we know the challenges with funding allotments on ADA, and we estimate that would provide roughly about a 1% raise for other staff. And there's also staff that are excluded from that support staff allotment, such as campus principals, assistant principals, and so on and so forth.
Does that have a requirement for a percentage of that money going to the staff?
You have to show where you're using 100% of that money for those support staff, but again, it would fund less than about a 1% raise for those.
So right now, we're
those
less than
folks.
50% of our staff receiving funds, but based on what you just shared with that small amount of dollar per student, that can go out to the remaining staff.
Yes, sir. And then kind of looking at House District 33, so again, kind of going back to what did House Bill 2 prioritize. So again, looking at the structure of it, obviously with House District 33, all of the districts in House District 33 have districts with enrollments of greater than 5,000 students. And so House Bill 2 certainly didn't prioritize districts in House District 33. And as you guys know, we're the only House District 33 district without a Vader. We have the lowest revenue per student by almost $1,000 per student because of that fact, and then by far the lowest tax rate as well. Speaking of our competitors, so you guys are familiar with this chart as well. So this is looking, and I should note that since so many districts have kind of waited on adopting their compensation plans, this is based on 24-25 data. So as more districts adopt their compensation plans, we'll certainly update this, but this is 24-25 data. So Rockwall ISD has lagged roughly about $3,000 behind the average market. And again, yes, House Bill 2 did provide a much needed and much deserved pay increase for our teachers, but since they took the structure of a one-size-fits-all across the board, what happened to all of our districts? They all went up by that amount. So while, yes, our teachers certainly deserve a pay increase, and it was very much appreciated, it didn't solve our challenge in Rockwall ISD of competing with all these other districts because all of the boats rose by the same level. So does it address inflation? So let's kind of go back to that new allotment, the ABC allotment. So it's roughly $106 per. I should correct that. I don't think it's per student. I think it's per ADA. And again, I think this was intended to cover cost increases of inflation. Here's just a couple of the cost increases that we've seen since 2019. I think you guys have seen this chart numerous times. But we estimate that this new allotment will provide roughly about $1.9 million in new funding to Rockwall ISD, which, as you guys know, our insurance premiums alone, so just one line item in our budget since 2019 has increased by over $3 million. So while we very much appreciate the legislature's acknowledgement that inflation has been very tough on school districts and appreciate them willing to provide additional resources to try to address inflation, the fact of the matter is that it just really doesn't move the needle a whole lot when trying to address inflation in all the categories that we've seen over the last couple of years. School safety, as I mentioned, it does increase the school safety allotment, roughly doubling it. So as you guys know, over the last couple of years since they created the school safety allotment back in 2023, we received a little over $500,000 to comply with all of those safety requirements. So this would increase it to about $1.1 or $1.2 million based on our early projections. When you look at all of the safety budget that we spend every single year, we annually spend close to about $3.4, $3.5 million. And so even with this increase, the safety and security requirements that Rockwall ISD must comply with is still going to be underfunded by over $2 million per year. Special education, as I mentioned, it does make adjustments to how special education is going to be funded across the state. And again, this is something that we supported, and I think it is needed, as you guys know. And I'm kind of simplifying this, but it's basically based on time in a classroom, not necessarily intensity of services. So you could have a student with a lot of needs and another student with not as many needs, but they get funded essentially the same way, because it's based on how much time both of those students spend in a particular classroom. And so they do, I think, intend to go to more of an intensity-based model. So if this student requires much more services versus this student, then a school district would receive funding accordingly. However, as I mentioned, the new system currently does not exist, and it's up to the TA commissioner to create that. And so for the first year of the biennium, we are not scheduled to get any new funding in special education. So that $1.8 billion that the TA estimates if they underfund special education across the state of Texas is still going to be roughly that same amount. And then even with the new funding taking effect in the second year of the biennium, you can see that we'll still be underfunded by roughly about $1.5 billion per year. So in a nutshell, I don't want to seem like we're not being appreciative. $8.5 billion is certainly a lot of money. Again, it's not about the dollar amount as much as it was about the structure and the vehicle that was used to allocate this money. And again, I want to emphasize that the original bill that was passed out of the House is basically completely different. It was completely supplanted by the Senate. But in a nutshell, again, teacher pay increases. It prioritized smaller districts over Rockwall ISD teachers. It completely excluded some Rockwall ISD teachers. It essentially increased unfunded mandates to school districts. And for us in particular, it's probably not going to make us more competitive. In fact, there's a likelihood it could make us less competitive. And you say, how is that? Well, again, it prioritized smaller school districts over larger districts. And so there's several rural school districts that surround Rockwall ISD. Well, if their teachers get a 60% larger raise than our teachers, we may be paying more than them now, but next year they may actually leapfrog us. So there could be a situation where we actually have more districts paying more than what we do because of how they structured this. Again, the basic allotment, it obviously didn't increase to adjust for inflation, and it's not really an increase because they basically just swapped around money we were already getting. The new ABC allotment, again, we very much appreciate their acknowledgement of that, but it doesn't even cover one line item in our budget with property insurance increases that we've seen. The school safety allotment, again, we appreciate the additional funding, but we're still very much underfunded there, almost $2 million per year. And in special education, again, I think it's a step in the right direction that we're acknowledging that we need to fund special education differently. But again, we're going to have to wait at least a year to see what that funding looks like. So in a nutshell, this is where the estimates that we're going to show you guys and the numbers we're going to show you guys tonight are completely subject to change. This literally could change tomorrow based on future guidance. But I think this is kind of based on the information that we have now and the guidance that we have now. This is what it looks like. So in a nutshell, we estimate that House Bill 2 for Rockwall ISD in particular could produce roughly about $9.6 million in new funding. So again, that's a lot of money, just like $8.5 billion is a lot of money, but really it's in how it was structured. So not only does it increase funding by $9.6 million, it also increases and creates new mandated expenditures in the total of about $7.8 million. So really, at the end of the day, it only has a net impact to the school district of about $1.8 million that we as local leaders and a local elected board have the flexibility or the autonomy to address.
Mr. Carter, do all those buckets include ADA or full funding?
So some of them are based, for instance, the basic allotment, that's obviously based on ADA. The teacher retention allotment is based on actual numbers of how many staff you have in a particular area. So the support staff allotment, I think that's based on ADA. The assistance with basic costs, I think that's based on ADA. The school safety funding, that's based on the number of campuses you have and ADA. And then the adjustments for early education funding, I don't know off the top of my head how that's funded.
But the majority of those buckets aren't 100% of the funds that we're seeing right now.
Correct.
Because a good attendance rate right now with flu and sicknesses, whatever, students being out, it's about 94%.
Correct. So it's, with most of those being based on the ADA, as you guys know, this is assuming this funding that we're showing here, it would be assuming you get 100% of that. Obviously,
but we'll never get 100% of this because of our attendance rate.
Correct. Typically, our last couple of years, our attendance rate has ranged anywhere from 93 to 95%. So again, we will continue to monitor guidance from TEA, monitor interpretations by the commissioner, and future guidance from the bill authors. But this is kind of our best guess of what the potential impact for House Bill 2 could be on Rockwall ISD going forward.
And so on this estimated new mandated expenses, Are those listed that way because these are some things that the state are saying they're going to fund now, but they may not fund in the future?
No, ma'am. So basically, and I'll go through them real quick. So the $5 million for teacher pay increases. So that's the $0, $2,500, and $5,000 mandated pay increases. So we have to provide that. The $820,000 for support staff pay increases. That's the I think it's $45 per ADA for all support staff that fall into the category of support staff. So again, we have to show where we're providing those staff those dollars. So those are mandates. The $650,000. So this is the estimated increase in payroll benefit costs that the school district is going to have to pay. Again, we put that in the unfunded mandate category because we have to give the pay increases, and therefore the payroll increase is also a requirement as a result of that. The reduction in a golden penny yield, I mean, we could show this as a negative revenue. We just kind of put it down here so all the numbers were the same. But this is what the estimated reduction in the golden penny. So this is we're reducing the revenue over here, and we're adding the same amount of revenue over here. And then the $240,000. So, and this is some of the information we have to vet out a little bit further. But part of House Bill 2 is also providing free early education to teachers. For instance, pre-K, I think we charge, jump in if I'm wrong, maybe $6,500 per year for pre-K services, even if you are a staff member. So under the law, the way we interpret it is that any staff member now, and I think we had like anywhere from about 20 to 30 staff members that were paying for pre-K services. So if that remains constant or similar next year, that would be revenue that would no longer come into the district because we would have to provide those services for free. So that's kind of a mandated cost. So all of these things are going to be things that we are going to have to do, or they are going to impact us one way or another.
Okay, so let me ask my question different. That's okay. On the $5 million at the top for the teacher pay increases, okay? Right now, the state is giving us that money for these teachers.
Yes, ma'am.
If the state decides down the road they're not going to give us that, does that mean now that we're going to be mandated to continue with that without being funded?
That's a good question. I think technically speaking, hypothetically, I don't know that we would be mandated. So in other words, if that allotment went away for some reason and we could not financially afford to continue to pay that, then I think it could be an option for the board to consider lowering the hiring schedule to take that away. And the reason I say that technically I think we could do that, it is typically when they mandate pay increases, really what they're mandating is the state minimum pay increases or a hiring schedule. And as you guys know, our hiring schedule is well above that. So for example, and I might be quoting the exact number, but a starting teacher pay based on the state minimum salary schedule is like $30-something thousand. Well, ours is going to be over $60,000 this year. So we're obviously well above that. And so if they say, hey, if the starting teacher pay is $33,000 on the state minimum pay scale and you're mandated to add $5,000 to that, well, we're so far above that, then it wouldn't really impact us. So that could be one way they do it. And again, this is some of the information we're going to have to vet out. But they may say, no, you have to give it to them, whatever they were making in 24, 25, you have to add $5,000 to that period and you have to maintain it. I think that's the way that they're going to interpret it. Whatever you were paying teachers in 24, 25, that plus 5,000 or that plus 2,500 is what you have to maintain. And that's what we were saying. That's what we were saying earlier. We worry when they start paying for things like that with allotments because allotments can be adjusted. I'll give you a quick example. We have the fast growth allotment. So obviously, as a fast growth district, we qualify for that. But they and I say never because I think since it's been in existence, they've had to prorate that every year. So they allocate so much money in the state budget to do it. And then based on how many districts qualify for that, if they can't afford to do all that, then they prorate it. In other words, maybe you were going to get $4 million for the fast growth allotment, but I have to prorate it by 5%, and you're only going to get 95% of that. And so allotments can be prorated based on the situation of the state budget from biennium to biennium. Did that answer your question?
I'll get with you later.
Okay.
Most of it, yes.
Okay.
But
I think in a nutshell, I think they're mandating that you provide these pay increases, and I think the intent is for them to be in perpetuity. Okay, so enough with House Bill 2. Real quick, some other major bills. So Senate Bill 4. So this was the major tax relief bill. You guys, we talked about this a couple times in the spring. The main thing that this was doing was increasing the mandatory homestead exemption from $100,000 to $140,000. They also have language in there increasing the homestead exemption for disabled and veterans and over 65. All of that was passed and sent to the governor. You guys may remember our concern with that is they had excluded certain hold harmless provisions in there, even for bonds that we'd already sold going back to 2023. So they since amended that language, which basically protected our taxpayers, and so we were happy with that. Now, ultimately, that is going to go to the November ballot for taxpayers to consider approving or denying, but we anticipate it passing just like the last time it was on the ballot. I did reach out to our chief appraisers, and he's basically in July. We mentioned getting the certified tax values in July. He's going to provide essentially 4 or 5 different scenarios, depending on the various scenarios that could happen if these exemptions were approved or denied. So essentially, it's like creating 4 or 5 different budgets for us, and so we'll continue to work with our appraisal district closely as well. Last one, House Bill 4, the Accountability Reform Bill. Unfortunately, this one ran out of time and died in committee, so Star will be with us next year as well. And then jumping lastly into the budget projections. So again, as I mentioned, and I hate to underscore this again, but there's still so much uncertainty with House Bill 2. So essentially the budget projections that we're going to show you guys tonight, the budget that was posted on our website, and ultimately the budget that's before you guys for consideration tonight is based on current law, okay? What most of the guidance that we've received, and I think what most school districts are going to do, is they're going to, especially ones with July 1 fiscal year starts, they're going to adopt their budgets on current law, and then as additional guidance comes back on House Bill 2, they'll make budget amendments later on. And TA has even put out guidance that because if you amend your budget by greater than a certain percentage, it can actually negatively impact your first ratings. And so they've already said, hey, don't worry about that. We're not going to ding you on your first ratings because we know there's a lot of uncertainty. So all that to say, the House Bill 2 details that we just went over with you guys are not included in these budget reductions or projections, but eventually will. So again, we still have all the same significant challenges. We've talked a lot about this. Continuing to recruit and retain teachers while competing against all the other districts that have VADERs. You guys know all the budget reductions that we talked about this past year. So everything on this screen, in some shape, form, or fashion, we are implementing for next year. And then we're also starting to already start work on subsequent years' budget reductions. But in a nutshell, here's what we look like. So again, projected budget deficit for the 25-26 school year of just shy of $6.4 million. Again, you can see between the revenue enhancements and the cost reductions, we were able to reduce that budget by over $3 million. We're planning to spend about $2.5 million opening up middle school number 4, roughly about $2.7 million in special education, either through new staffing, stipend increases, new stipends, recruitment with sign-on bonuses. And then we also still have the 3% compensation plan that you guys adopted back in April included in the budget projection. So with all that being said, again, projecting roughly about a $6.4 million budget deficit. Now, again, if we do try to kind of do a little bit of cowboy math here and try to incorporate what we estimate the potential impact of House Bill 2 could be, as you guys may remember, the net impact of actual new money to the school district was roughly about $1.8 million. So again, that would still put our our budget deficit in the $4.5 million range, even incorporating House Bill 2, which again is not sustainable long term. Speaking of long term, here's kind of a 3-year forecast. So again, next year 6.4, the year after that 8.2, and the year after that 9.4. And again, not doing a whole lot, providing modest compensation increases at 2%, staffing for growth, and then to be honest, pretty modest assumptions for inflation. And then again, as I mentioned, last couple steps is just waiting to get our final certified tax values in.